Welcome to That Police Officer's channel. Today, we are going to examine a case that shakes the very foundation of trust, safety, and the sanctity of home. A case that leaves us questioning how something so unthinkable could unfold within the walls meant to provide security and protection. A house set ablaze, 3 children trapped inside, and a mother now facing the most serious of charges. What should have been a normal morning in Grand Rapids, Michigan, turned into an unimaginable scene of chaos and devastation. The fire claimed the life of 12-year-old Shamiya Stewart, while her younger siblings managed to escape. The person alleged to be responsible for this tragedy? Their own mother, 46-year-old Roconda Singleton. As a veteran officer who has responded to countless emergencies, I can tell you that structure fires are always high-stakes situations. But this one would prove to be far more sinister than a typical house fire. This case is disturbing on multiple levels. Not only was this fire set intentionally, but investigators allege that precautions were taken to ensure the children had little chance of escaping. Reports indicate that fire alarms had been removed, and as the flames spread, Singleton allegedly stood outside, watching it unfold. The actions described in court documents paint a chilling picture, one that we will explore in detail. What could drive a parent to commit such an unspeakable act? What evidence led authorities to swiftly arrest Singleton? And most importantly, how did 2 of these children manage to survive against all odds? We'll break down the investigation, the forensic evidence, and the legal proceedings that followed. Stay with me as we uncover the facts of this case, piece by piece. This is not just another tragic headline. This is a crime that demands answers. And as we delve deeper, the details will only become more unsettling. On the morning of January 25, 2025, emergency responders in Grand Rapids, Michigan, were dispatched to a house engulfed in flames. The fire department arrived swiftly, but by the time they gained control of the fire, it was clear that this was not a routine emergency. Inside the burning structure were 3 children, 2 of whom managed to escape. The third, 12-year-old Shamiya Stewart, was later found unresponsive. Shamiya was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but despite the best efforts of medical personnel, she succumbed to her injuries 2 days later. Her younger sisters, ages 10 and 7, were treated for minor injuries and smoke inhalation before being released. As investigators combed through the wreckage, the evidence quickly pointed to something more sinister than an accidental fire. The first alarming discovery was the absence of operational smoke detectors. It wasn't that they had failed. It was that they had been deliberately removed. Authorities later found the missing alarms inside a pillowcase in the backyard, their sirens still ringing when they were recovered. The fire, according to preliminary findings, had 2 points of origin, one in an upstairs bathroom and another in the living room. Accelerants were detected at both locations. A deliberate act of arson was becoming increasingly clear. The person suspected of setting the fire? The children's own mother, Roconda Singleton. Witnesses at the scene, including neighbors and first responders, reported that Singleton was standing outside as the fire consumed the home. Instead of attempting to rescue her children or call for help, she allegedly watched in silence. As news of the incident spread, the community was left in shock. How could a mother do this to her own children? What circumstances led to this horrifying event? Law enforcement officials moved quickly, and Singleton was taken into custody later that same day. In the hours following her arrest, investigators worked to piece together Singleton's actions before and during the fire. It didn't take long before she allegedly admitted to setting the blaze herself. In her statements to authorities, she reportedly described using lighter fluid and a match to ignite the flames in both locations within the home, fully aware that her 3 children were asleep inside. In the days that followed, investigators built their case against Singleton, leading to a series of charges. Initially charged with first-degree arson and multiple counts of child abuse, her legal situation took a far more serious turn following Shamiya's death. With the loss of life confirmed, Singleton now faces a charge of murder. With an active investigation still underway, many questions remain. What was the motive behind this horrifying act? Were there any warning signs leading up to this tragedy? And what evidence will prosecutors present to hold Singleton accountable? In the next section, we will break down the investigation, the forensic findings, and the legal proceedings that follow. The full scope of this case is only beginning to unfold. The moment we arrived at the scene, it was clear this wasn't an ordinary house fire. Flames had already consumed much of the structure, and heavy smoke billowed into the sky. Fire crews worked tirelessly to douse the flames, but for us, the officers on scene, the real work had just begun. Our first priority was ensuring the safety of any survivors. We quickly confirmed that 2 children had escaped the burning house, both injured but alive. The third child, 12-year-old Shamiya Stewart, was found unconscious inside and transported to the hospital in critical condition. Her chances of survival were uncertain. While paramedics handled the medical response, our focus shifted to securing the scene. Fires can be unpredictable, but something about this one felt off from the very beginning. The way it spread, the extent of the damage, and most importantly, the lack of functioning smoke alarms. These were all red flags that this wasn't an accident. With the flames finally extinguished, investigators from the fire department and our forensic team entered the charred remains of the house. One of the first pieces of evidence we recovered was disturbing. 7 smoke alarms, all removed from their mounts, found inside a pillowcase in the backyard. This immediately raised suspicions. Why would anyone remove the alarms unless they wanted to prevent those inside from being alerted? Next, we turned to the origin of the fire. A preliminary analysis from fire marshals indicated that there were 2 separate points of ignition, one in an upstairs bathroom and another in the living room. This suggested the use of an accelerant, and sure enough, chemical testing confirmed the presence of lighter fluid. This wasn't an accident, it was arson. As officers, we rely on facts. And the facts in this case were becoming increasingly clear. Someone had deliberately set this fire with the intent of harming those inside. While forensic teams worked inside, our next step was canvassing the neighborhood. Speaking to neighbors and bystanders often provides critical leads, and this case was no different. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the mother, Roconda Singleton, standing outside the home as it burned. She wasn't screaming for help. She wasn't trying to go back inside. She was just watching. One witness, a man who lived 2 houses down, told us something chilling. I heard the kids screaming for help. The fire was getting worse, but she just stood there. She didn't move. Didn't even try to do anything. At this point, we needed more than just witness statements. We needed definitive proof of what happened in the moments before the fire. That's when we turned to surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera. The footage captured Singleton leaving the house early that morning, appearing calm and methodical. Minutes later, smoke began pouring from the windows. It was compelling evidence, but we needed to hear from Singleton herself. Singleton was taken into custody later that evening. During initial questioning, she remained emotionless. She didn't ask about her children, didn't inquire about Shamiya's condition, nothing. That in itself was alarming. When confronted with the evidence, she initially denied involvement. But as we laid out the facts, no forced entry, smoke alarms removed, multiple points of origin, and her lack of any attempt to save her children, her story started to crumble. Finally, after hours of interrogation, she broke. She admitted to setting the fire. According to her statement, she used lighter fluid and a match to ignite the flames in the bathroom and the living room. When asked why, her response was as cold as it was unsettling. I just wanted to start over. Singleton showed no visible remorse. She acknowledged knowing her children were inside and made no effort to warn or wake them. The details of her confession were horrifying, but they solidified the case against her. With Singleton's confession, we had everything we needed to charge her. Initially, she faced charges of first-degree arson and multiple counts of child abuse. However, when Shamiya succumbed to her injuries 2 days later, the charges escalated. Singleton was now facing murder. As law enforcement, we don't just seek convictions, we seek justice. The case was handed over to the prosecution, but our work wasn't finished. Forensic teams continued analyzing burn patterns, examining Singleton's background for any history of abuse, and gathering evidence to ensure an airtight case. Investigating crimes like these is never easy. It requires patience, diligence, and the ability to piece together a puzzle where the edges are charred and burned. But one thing was clear from the start. This wasn't just another tragic fire. It was a calculated act of destruction, one that took the life of an innocent child. The surviving children now face an unimaginable loss, and our job as officers extends beyond the investigation. We work closely with child services, ensuring they receive the support they need. Cases like this remind us why we do what we do, not just to hold criminals accountable, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In the next section, we'll explore the legal proceedings, the courtroom battle that followed. In the pursuit of justice for Shamiya Stewart, with the investigation complete and overwhelming evidence against Roconda Singleton, the legal process began. Singleton was formally charged with first-degree arson, multiple counts of child abuse, and, after the tragic death of 12-year-old Shamiya Stewart, a murder charge was added. The gravity of the case meant that prosecutors would push for the harshest penalty possible. From the moment she was taken into custody, Singleton remained cold and detached. At her arraignment, she barely acknowledged the charges as they were read aloud. A not guilty plea was entered on her behalf by the judge, and the courtroom, filled with members of the community and grieving family members, sat in silence as the proceedings unfolded. The prosecution built their case on the extensive evidence gathered by law enforcement. The removed smoke alarms, the presence of lighter fluid, multiple points of ignition, and, most damning of all, Singleton's own confession were presented in meticulous detail. The jury listened as investigators took the stand, walking them through the sequence of events that led to the devastating fire. Surveillance footage showing Singleton leaving the house just moments before smoke began pouring from the windows was played in court. But perhaps the most heartbreaking testimony came from the surviving children. Despite their young ages, they were able to recount the horror of that morning, the flames, the fear, and the desperate escape that saved their lives. The 10-year-old, who had grabbed her younger sister and jumped from the second-story window, testified with remarkable composure. She described waking up to thick smoke, her attempts to wake Shamiya, and the realization that their mother was nowhere to be found. Her words left the courtroom shaken. The defense attempted to argue that Singleton was suffering from severe mental distress at the time of the incident, suggesting that she had been overwhelmed by financial hardship, emotional instability, and the pressures of single motherhood. They painted a picture of a woman who had lost control rather than a cold-blooded murderer. Mental health experts were brought in to testify about her psychological state, but the prosecution countered with the undeniable evidence that this was a calculated act. One of the most chilling moments of the trial came when the lead investigator recounted Singleton's confession. In a recorded interview played for the jury, Singleton's voice was emotionless as she described how she doused the bathroom and living room with lighter fluid and struck the match. When asked why, she simply responded, "I just wanted to start over." The prosecution emphasized this statement, arguing that Singleton made a conscious choice to destroy her home with her children inside, ensuring there was little chance for them to escape. Removing the smoke alarms was not the act of someone in a momentary breakdown. It was premeditated. As the trial progressed, the weight of the case became evident. The community followed every hearing, hoping for justice for Shamiya. Her father, overcome with grief, sat in the gallery each day, listening to the gruesome details. His pain was visible, and it was clear that no verdict would ever truly bring closure. After weeks of testimony, the case was handed to the jury. Deliberations were swift. The evidence was overwhelming, the intent was undeniable, and the loss was immeasurable. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Singleton showed no reaction as the judge read the decision. The weight of her crimes had finally been laid bare before the world. The sentencing hearing would determine the full extent of her punishment, but with a first-degree murder conviction, the possibility of parole was off the table. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars. For the family, the verdict brought some semblance of justice, but the pain remained. Shamiya was gone, and no sentence could bring her back. Her younger sisters, now orphans in a sense, faced an uncertain future. The community rallied around them, offering support, but the scars of that night would never fade. The case of Roconda Singleton serves as a grim reminder of the darkest corners of human nature. As officers, we see tragedies unfold, but some cases linger, haunting even the most seasoned among us. This was one of those cases. A case where the person meant to protect turned into the greatest threat. A case where justice was served, but at an unbearable cost. This story is not just about crime and punishment. It's about a child who fought to survive, a community that came together in the wake of tragedy, and the pursuit of truth in the face of horror. Justice was delivered in the courtroom, but the echoes of that fateful day will remain forever. As officers, we encounter the worst of humanity. We see crimes that defy understanding, acts of violence that shatter families, and tragedies that leave entire communities grasping for answers. But some cases stay with us long after the investigation is closed, the trial has ended, and the sentence has been handed down. This was one of those cases. The death of Shamiya Stewart was not just another statistic. It was a devastating loss that could have been prevented. A child who had fought to survive since birth, a girl who had her entire future ahead of her, was taken in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. She never had a chance to wake up, to escape, to fight for her life the way her sisters did. And the person responsible wasn't a stranger or an outsider, but the one person who should have protected her above all else, her own mother. For law enforcement, this case served as a grim reminder that danger isn't always external. Sometimes, it comes from within the very walls meant to keep us safe. It forces us to question what drives a person to commit such an unspeakable act. Was it desperation? Was it selfishness? Was it something darker? But beyond the questions and the investigations, there are the survivors. The two young girls who lost their sister, their mother, and the life they once knew in a single morning. They are the ones left to carry the weight of this tragedy. No amount of justice will erase what they endured, but the hope is that they find strength, that they receive the support they need to heal, and that they know they are not alone. The community of Grand Rapids came together in the wake of this loss, proving that even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, there is still kindness, resilience, and love. Donations poured in to help the surviving children, vigils were held in Shamiya's memory, and people who had never met the Stewart family mourned alongside them. Because this wasn't just their tragedy, it was everyone's. And for those of us in law enforcement, it reaffirms why we do this job. Not for recognition, not for statistics, but for justice. For the innocent lives stolen too soon. For those who can no longer speak for themselves. Some cases are easy to leave behind. Others stay with you. This one will always be remembered, not just as another criminal case, but as a heartbreaking lesson in the fragility of life and the darkness that sometimes hides where we least expect it. Justice was served in the